little Julian Bream. This is, yeah. So when, Julian Bream was really kind of like the main guy for me on record, I have to say, as a kid, I started classical guitar lessons when I was 7, growing up in Buffalo, 7 or 8, with Jeremy Sparks. And Jeremy would go to the public library and bring a lot of these records, and then a lot of them I also, my parents also bought for me as we went along. I have to say, when I was a kid, I wasn't really so into the lute playing so much, but this is what Bream's great contribution was to the instrument in early music, is because he really brought a lot of visibility to the lute. So even, now, of course, a lot of early music groups are, there's lots of them, within the umbrella of classical music. And so while some of my early music friends would say that Bream's technique and whatnot was maybe not, according to the treatises or whatnot, he basically played it, he played the lute the way he would play a classical guitar, with his nails and all that sort of thing. He really helped the classical guitarists and also classical musicians to really appreciate music from an earlier time than the classical era. So yeah, these are great. And these Westminster recordings are just some of the best. See, this is one that would have been brought to me from the library in Granada. So the Guado 8 lessons, and yeah, I remember listening to these. My teacher wisely had me really listen to as many players as possible, as many of the original, the great 20th century players. I gravitated on record, of course, to Julian Bream and John Williams. But I got to know Segovia's playing style a lot through through recordings like this, and my favorite Spanish encores. This looks like almost like a repackage. And I remember this one, the intimate guitar. This is, again, I remember getting this from the library, and had some really cool things on here. The Prelude in E Ponce, of course. That was one of my very first concert pieces. In my very first recital, I played the Ponce Prelude in E, and so I definitely would have listened to this particular recording for a reference on that piece. So. Yeah, so this has the Divisé suite, the Weiss Tombeau for Logi, a really great piece of music. And then some sort of selected Bach pieces, Weiss, Sans. Yeah, this is great because, this is a golden era in a way for, recordings. I mean, these guys really just kind of crank these out, crank these records out one after the other. So, okay, a Bach program for the guitar, all Bach. Prelude and Fugue from the Partita in C minor. Prelude, Fugue, Allegro, Chaconne. Wow, this is an impressive recital. And he's really quite young here. This is another Westminster. I got to hear actually these Westminster, these early Bream recordings at a colleague's house after a recital that I did at the Sonoma State University, that new concert hall that they got there. And he has one of these really expensive turntables and speakers. And I was just, we did a compare contrast thing between these and the RCA and then other guitarists' records, and these Westminster just sound so great. The miking or the distance from him to the mic, it's just a very live sound and wonderful. Vinyl, of course, great stuff. Yeah, Williams and Bream, were kind of my guys, and those early Parkening records too are really great. The EMI Angel ones, yeah, Julian and John, and all of this album cover designs, Psychedelic Glory, excellent. Yeah, these are big selling records, the Julian and John. They did one, and they had to do a sequel, Julian and John 2. Because these are really quite big sellers. So yeah, I mean, there's a cool story about that on the Julian Bream DVD documentary, how John had called them up when they got these gold records, or these gold discs, or silver discs they were called. They had the silver disc for a certain number of copies, and John had called them up, and he said, he went to play his silver disc, on his turntable, and it was like a Rolling Stones record. So they just slapped his label, onto like a Stones record and dipped it in silver or whatever they do for that kind of thing. Maybe one of the most important recordings he ever made, because this is the Barrios recording. Again, a super album cover, almost looks like a Weather Report album cover from the 70s. And it's like, yeah, I mean, this was, people really weren't championing Barrios's music. I mean, Segovia didn't really go out of his way to promote this really wonderful music for the guitar, and Williams did. And I think this really, as time goes on, this really looks to be maybe one of the most important artistic statements really for him, is to just say, like, this guy Barrios was really a major deal. So very cool, excellent record. Oh, this is a really early record. These are like these are the cello suites. Yeah, these are the two cello suites, number 1 and number 3. And I had these recordings too on compilations, like kind of the Art of Guitar or something like that. And yeah, I know those recordings pretty well too. Columbia Records presents John Williams, so this must be the debut. I think the Barbra Streisand album came out around the same year as this one, maybe. And this is the famous Segovia quote: "A prince of the guitar has arrived in the musical world. God has laid a finger on his brow." It was the first and only label he was on. Yeah, and this was, I would have to imagine this was a really good label to be on. Obviously they became a very powerful label with, in terms of the pop stuff, like Billy Joel and Bruce Springsteen, major artists on, on this kind of thing. So it's probably a good label if you were a classical musician to really be associated with. And yeah, Fourth Lute Suite. This is like, again, this is kind of like the Fourth Lute Suite is a big kind of technical step forward, the prelude. Before this recording, it really wasn't considered by some of the more established guitarists at the time to be really something that could be tackled. It was, kind of more or less unplayable. And now, of course, it's like students, my students, Curtis, play it with relative ease. But at the time, that was a major milestone in technical achievement. I mean, he's the man. Yeah, this one I had. This is Virtuoso Variations for Guitar. This is a big one in my personal collection. It had the Bach Chaconne transcribed by Williams, and the Paganini, the Caprice violin, 24th Caprice, and I basically the variations on a theme of Handel by Julian, which I was learning at the time, was really, and the Chaconne, which I learned in high school. This was a big reference recording for me. And this one, of course, is fantastic. This has a lot of just these wonderful short pieces, Villa-Lobos, Torba pieces, the Giuliani Sonata. This is, we're kind of getting back to this kind of programming again. This is a very early John Williams recording. We're getting back to this programming where now you can, you don't have to make an entire album of one composer. You can just make this kind of schematic. My latest record, Play, is basically like all these different composers from different countries, provided that you provide some kind of, narrative thread or some kind of, they have to kind of hang together now a little bit more than they did back then, so.